My name is Adam Labar. I help run a couple different companies. I do various different things. And the purpose of this podcast is really just to chat about dads and entrepreneurship and kind of focus on tips, tools, tricks we use to teach our kids, things that we learned as dads that help us as entrepreneurs, things we learned as entrepreneurs that help us as dads, how we kind of got onto the entrepreneur track, and a little bit about that. So I figured it would be kind of fitting to bring my dad on for the very first podcast. So the first dad that I'm going to talk to is my own, kind of give a little bit of background on him, tell a little bit of stories about us, and just kind of see where it goes. We don't really have a structure for the conversation we're going to have. It's just going to be me and my dad chatting. The reason that I'm a dad is because of my dad. So it seemed to be pretty fitting to have him be the first person that I chat with on this. So a little bit about us. Well, first off, that's my dad, Tim. Say hi, Dad.
His dad.
There he is. Like it or not, he's stuck with me. So a little bit of background about us, and Dad, feel free to interrupt if I go too fast over something. You want to say something, just let me know. But a little bit of background about us. I was born as a military brat. My dad was Air Force. My mom was Air Force. My dad was in for 16 years before you broke your back?
14.
14 years?
I broke it at 12 and then they...
Okay.
Yeah.
But 14 years in the Air Force. And then after that, we bounced around a lot, even still up in upstate New York. Dad was finding different jobs and supporting the family in the best way he could where we were at and what was going on. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was one of those things, military members kind of realize this, but as a military brat, I still look back at it and go, okay, well, I have this memory. What house were we living in? Okay, we were living in this house. Okay, so that means it was this year. And that's how I remember where things were. It's just...
Was it on Church Street? Was it in Payville or was it North Dakota?
You never know. So I don't remember North Dakota at all, other than going back to visit. But, that was kind of... Dad ended up becoming a correction officer in New York. And then we finally got to settle down for my last few years in school. So I graduated in Central New York and off to the military I went. So it was a big mess of moving around and figuring things out and bouncing here and bouncing there, finding new friends, going over here to learn more about these friends. And that's kind of the life I've known now forever. Military brat, now turned military. And after almost 2 decades of doing the military thing,
you're getting ready to move.
Here I go, move it again, right? Why not? Because why not? So that was an awesome trip. I learned a ridiculous amount, Dad, from you that I didn't realize I learned until much later in life, right? So I forgot who it was that talks about it, like the path that you go with your dad. That I'm going to butcher this, and I don't remember exactly what it is, but it's basically like you idolize your dad, and then you despise your dad, and then you accept your dad, and then there's one more stage there that's basically like you become your dad, or you like these different stages that you have with your father, right? It took some time for me, especially like once I joined the military, and to really realize what you are actually doing for us or what you did for us in the ways that you knew how. And we chatted a little bit before this that you didn't have exactly the best example for somebody to follow as a dad. And so that once I learned more about that, it shined such a light on who you were and how you became who you were, that it was like a smack in the face to me. Like, you ignorant idiot. You had no idea what your father ever went through to get to the point where he is now, to get you, Adam, to the point where you're able to be a dad to a couple boys and start businesses and do all this stuff. Like, had you not made a shift from what you saw, there's no way that I would be where I'm at. So, because typically, we'll get into it a little bit, but typically somebody who comes from a background like yours just goes down, it tends to go down the same path of abuse and all that type of stuff. But I want to turn it over to you to kind of tell a little bit of story about yourself, however it is you want to do an introduction, and we can continue the chat.
I never grew up with a dad. I didn't know what it meant to love a dad. Mine died before I was a year old. And then 3 years later, stepfather came in and there was 8 of us. So I was the youngest of 5 boys. And virtually all 5 of them, and just like everybody else in the family, they all took pretty bad turns. When I joined the Air Force, like you, I was awakening. I said, there is a life. I mean, I joined the Air Force to get away from home. I mowed lawns as a kid to get away from home. I milked cows and worked at a drive-in to stay away from home because there was no good leading examples. I knew the Air Force would fix that. So 17, I found a different path. And then the Air Force just, it opened all of it up. And I'm an Air Force dad. I mean, I have a little sign that my sister made. We go where the Air Force sends us. All that traveling made me a different dad because I learned how different cultures treat their kids. Food, exposure to everything. I mean, you've been in the desert, you've been in the mountains. You've been down here in sunny Florida and Japan. It's all stuff that has made you a better dad too. And I'm kind of tickled that it's taken you over almost 40 years to figure out how tough it is to be a dad and then reflect on what I may or may not have done.
Yeah.
I just hope I didn't do too many things in anger because you can't take that back.
Yeah.
I remember one thing in particular on a golf course that made me sick for 3 days, but I'll never break another club. Never broken in my life.
Yeah.
I never forgot that because what kind of an example am I setting as a dad? There's another dad time where he's pounding down the beers like it's water on a hot day with his two sons. I see the example he's making. I just made an error. And I fixed it and never did it again. I don't think I've ever lost my temper on the golf course since. I never had a culture. I mean, my family was all in the family. Back then, they didn't call it racist, but they were outright racist. Mm-hmm. I think my dad, my stepfather would roll over in his grave if he looked at, my children, his grandchildren's spouses. And for those that are listening, I have a very black son-in-law, a first-generation Cuban-American daughter-in-law, and another son-in-law that's white as rice. How more blended can you get than them three? Yep. And I love them all. I love their family, and their family, it's that moral compass. We're all basically in the same, we all believe in God. And that's grounded everybody's moral compass in the roots of this family. And it never existed outside the Catholic Church. They go to church. You do something that I was never exposed to as a kid, is you take the time to teach, give the opportunity for them to learn. This is why you don't do this. This is why we're doing this as a family. Never had any of that. And I've seen it many times. You're way better at it than I ever was. It took me a little while to catch on, to figure it all out. But as a teaching dad, you're very good at it. And it reflects in your kids. And they're teeny-weeny. Yeah. But they have respect for themselves and others, whereas I didn't grow up with any of that. Yeah. To get back to molding me as a father, the combination of having a daughter, politically, I was scared to death. Do I really want a kid? We had hostages in Iran at the time. And we were very nearly going to war. We had Carter as president, gas lines. I mean, life was tough back then, just like it is now. How do you grasp it all? And now you're going to bring a kid into the world. Ronald Reagan became president. It was the opposite. Not necessarily that I was really heavy into politics, but I learned, he said, pick a course. You got to pick a path. And the Air Force, a year later, came down with, what the quality of life, or there was a name for it. You used to be able to get a DWI in the Air Force and still keep your job. Not get busted, just get yelled at. Smoking dope with all the Vietnam vets that I was exposed to, that was no big deal. Quality force, that's what it was. Reagan brought that in 81. And it weeded out a lot of the guys that I kind of worked with in life. Wait a minute, these guys were all drunks and druggies. No, that's not the path I wanted. Yeah. I always refer to Reagan a lot. He took away all the evils that I was exposed to, but didn't realize they were evils because I was exposed to them growing up. Yeah. And you guys never had to worry about that. And that's a huge evil because it's so tempting. I mean, alcoholism ran through my entire family. Everyone in my family was a bartender. I want to be a bartender. But it was 6 days a week, you don't pay for it. I didn't want that. And I darned for it. I want to be different. Between the military exposure to the world and then corrections exposure to real life, because I brought some of the stories home. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of them to you guys. I try to keep it humorous, but all that makes dads. So that's why I kind of sort of brought politics in a little bit. You can learn a lot what's going on right now today. Are we going down the right path or not? If that's your moral compass, maybe you need a little more training, especially, and don't spring load to automatic labeling people and then shutting out honest opinion. Yeah. For a group that believes in science, science is science. The Bible is the Bible. They are what they are. If you're out there and you're involved, you'll know what course to take. Yeah. As long as you have a good moral compass, you'll know what course to take, and you will become that dad. It takes work. no one's going to give it to you, and you can't look inward in your family all the time. You got to look out. You got to see the world to learn how to mold that clay. And it took the world with the Air Force to teach me everything from cultural foods to people to needs. Every culture is different, and that's important when you're raising kids. And I never realized how important until you guys grew up and graduated, went on your way. I look at the families and I say, we did good. We did good.
Today, my guest is a very good friend of mine, business partner, buddy, anything and everything. We've done a lot of stuff together, GoBundance, Mastermind Brothers. So Sergio, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you. If you can, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and then we'll jump into being very dad focused.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Adam. So my name is Sergio Altamari. I'm based out of Philadelphia. 47 years old, got a little girl. She's about to be 6 on March 11th. I'm a reborn, recareered over and over again. Had spent 22 years working for the Federal Reserve, had a day job, launched a company in the meantime. We're in self-storage, syndication, moving more and more towards larger private equity. My wife, daughter, and I are very close and tight, as you might expect. And so my whole objective in life is to find that right amount of balance between creating legacy wealth and doing what I enjoy, which is now building a company and spending as much time with my family, while also doing my best to create or at least allow for my child to be, develop her own way and kind of learn from my mistakes, things that I wish that my parents did or didn't do. And, along the way, just enjoy the ride and the journey.
Let's look at your dad. Tell me a little bit about the relationship between you and your dad and how maybe that influenced how you wanted to be as a father, as much or as little detail as you'd like to go into on that.
Cool. So I'll probably get a little bit philosophical here because my relationship with my dad has taken me on a journey of self-reflection, awareness. My dad had mental issues. My father passed away. Now it's been 7 years. Just recently, just recently. And so, my dad was very much raised very traditional and conventional. If you look at the fundamentals of life, it's to survive and reproduce. And my father very much was the guy that reproduced, had kids, but then his focus was on surviving, and what that means is just working. My father was a tailor. My parents were Italian immigrants, and my father had a nervous breakdown in the 80s, dealt with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, later on in Parkinson's. He came from a really small village in Italy, and it was I guess now we would call it probably more of a psychologically abusive type of upbringing, where he was kind of like put to work at a early age, like 10, 12 years old. I mean, that's what you did then. So as I grew up, and especially in my teenage years, being in a household, with a father that had mental issues and whatnot, I didn't. What did I know about that? My dad was just strange. And so anyway, it wasn't until I ultimately in my 20s developed my own anxieties, panic attacks, little, disorders myself, to where I became, was through the going through multiple doctors and, exploring, hey, am I dying of this? And because, mental issues manifest into physical issues. So that's what I experienced. And it was through all that where I was kind of I have 2 older sisters, and my sisters were the primary ones that took care of my dad and brought him. My parents didn't drive, so my sisters took my dad to doctor's visits and whatever. I was kind of a disconnected kid. There was a lot of resentment there. So anyway, long story short, it was eventually where he developed a vascular disease from cigarette smoking, and it was he ultimately had to get his leg amputated, and it was at that point where it was on me to kind of sign off on that, because nobody else in the family would do that. That kind of forced me into kind of quickly growing up and assuming more of a male leadership role in the family. And I bring all this up because it was through all of those experiences and going through my own anxiety issues that, number one, is it brought me closer to now more so prayer and church and spirituality, but at that time, understanding psychology and being more self-aware. I mean, I've been meditating now for 20 some years. I spend more time working on my mental issues, or not, don't want to say mental issues, but my mental outlook and being self-aware. And that has translated into me. Number one is I love, like you mentioned, being a dad. I think that is the pinnacle of honor in life, is to bring a child into the world. And then it's an obligation to nurture and raise that child, not in a controlling way, but in a way that allows the child to live the way we're designed, which is in harmony with life and just, loving life. And I tell people all the time, like when they ask like how Stella, and she's still that way, I say she's perfect. I can only screw her up. And what I mean by that is not intentionally, but we are, we are offspring of our parents. And so we hand down the way that we think we're supposed to raise kids and do this, that, and the other thing. And my approach, and Corinne, thank God, I married somebody we share the same approach, is to not, right? It's kind of like create guardrails, and the guardrails are really far and wide. You're not going to fall off a cliff, but you can get awfully close to it. Mm-hmm. And then really kind of steer and kind of use the world as your playground, if you will. And so I use my daughter as to learn myself, because she's showing what play, joy, untainted love of life it looks like. And as we've gotten older, I'm kind of working more towards getting back to that. But that's I mean, I could go on and on, but I've learned to study my dad, my parents, their upbringing, and trying to learn and kind of say, what are the really parts that I know that I've inherited that I'm really super proud of? And then how do I pass those down while kind of tweaking those things that I'm like, yeah, that's a part of me that I don't really like, want, or need.
I think that's unbelievably valuable to do. I think that I personally have seen way too many parents that they don't think about how they're parenting. They don't think about, they just, well, this is what I know how to do, so this is what I do, right? So one of the things that I talk about in with coaching students, with anybody, is the book Secrets of a Millionaire Mind, right? Where it's mostly talking about money, but it basically is talking about where you got your framework for money. Like for me, I got my framework for money from my parents, just like I got my framework for parenting from my parents.
Yeah.
I needed to analyze that myself to figure out how I wanted to take what was good and leave what was bad, right? Like to chew the meat, spit out the bones, right? But so many people are just stuck with the whole rack of ribs. They don't chew the meat and spit out the bones. They're just like, well, this is what I've got, so this is what I'm going to do. My dad beat me, so I'm going to beat my kids. My dad did this, so I'm going to do, we can set it up to where we stop the pattern of bad behavior and continue the patterns of good behavior. But you can't do that unless you start thinking about it. So, that's one thing I've appreciated, hearing some of your story before and knowing that's one of the, I think the benefits of being around a group of guys that we're with is we are always trying to challenge each other to become better and critically think about what we're doing. And one thing that I just would love for people to critically think more about is how they're being a parent, how they're being a dad, especially, right? Because I think dads are, while I'm not taking anything away from moms, dads are an extremely important part of a child's life, right? I mean, fatherless homes, I don't know the statistics right off the top of my head, but fatherless homes are like the number one cause for people going to jail, for people not graduating high school, all the stuff. And it's not because a mom can't do these things. It's because there's the balance of having a dad there, right? An involved dad. Today we have John Huber, a good friend of mine and part of the group Go Abundance that you've heard me talk about before on the podcast. But John, I want you to do a quick introduction of yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what kind of business stuff you're in, and tell me about your family as well.
Well, thanks for having me. So my name is John, originally from New Jersey, dad of 2 kids, a 6-year-old girl and a 4-year-old boy, husband to my wife, Sana's, and we live in South Florida now by way of Los Angeles. So we lived in Los Angeles for about 5 years, and a fur dad too. I got a little dog named Wilbur. So family of 5. I'm involved in real estate. I still have a W-2 in the data world. So I'm a techie and, doing my best to balance everything.
Tell me a little bit about where you come from, maybe a little bit about your dad and some of the characteristics of your dad and, some that you took and some that you decided not to take. Let's hear a little bit about that.
Well, I can honestly say that my upbringing has definitely shaped the way that I'm a parent. Very, very interesting upbringing. So I am the youngest of 4. I have 3 older sisters. And I was raised by a single mom. My parents got divorced when I was 1. And, obviously I grew up with a lot of estrogen in the house, being the only guy and the youngest. So, I did crave that attention from my dad. He was around in, sporadic weekends in the early years. And then when I was 12, had a son. So that kind of took a lot of his time. And we really didn't see much of him for like the next 8 years. And then once I became 21, 22, we became really good friends. And we actually had a really great relationship. So my upbringing was really, my mom was basically my dad. But, she had her own struggles of trying to provide for 4 kids, always working. So my oldest sister actually took on that role of a parent. So interesting upbringing with a sporadic dad growing up and, my mom trying to provide and my sister being there for a lot of the guidance as well. So it was really a combination of the 3 that turned me into the parent that I am today. I always knew that I wanted to be a hands-on dad, because I never had the parents at my basketball games, at my soccer games growing up. So I knew that when I became a dad, I was going to be extremely active, extremely hands-on, because I knew that I craved that as a child. Like, all the other parents are at the soccer games on the sidelines, bringing orange slices, and I never had that. Yeah. So I did know that I wanted to be active and hands-on. But having the relationship later with my father, that actually helped me become a better husband. So, because I realized it wasn't until I had the relationship with my father afterwards, I realized, it was never going to work between you and mom. Like they're just 2 different people, oil and water. Like it was just never going to happen. But as a child, I didn't understand that because when you're 6, 7, 8 years old, you don't understand the dynamic of adults co-living or coexisting. Yeah. So I realized I did have a lot of resentment growing up.
Welcome to the podcast today. I have a fantastic friend, business partner, Go Abundance partner, man of many talents, Aaron Velke. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Tell me a bit about yourself, and let's hear about who Aaron Velke is, what you do for business, about your family, etc.
I've got a company called Get Out of Your Own Way. So I've adopted this skill over a long period of time of being able to get people out of their own way. And our coaching program is for entrepreneurs that want to level up their mindset, which trickles down into their behavior, their patterns, their values, and the way they live their lifestyle. We also work with companies that are ready to up-level their leaders and ready to up-level their culture. So we work with both the individuals and the companies. I'm a real estate investor. I'm about a year into being a dad, 10 months in 2 days into being a dad. So that has colored a rather simple world. Business is certainly a lot of fun, but it has really added a dimension to my life that's pretty significant. I've had a lot of different hats that I've worn over the course of my life. Man, I was a soccer coach and a personal trainer for many, many years, over a decade. I published a book on that called Let Her Play in 2020. I've done apartment management. I've was a painter for about 2 years, where I was producing acrylic on canvas and creating these like abstract paintings to go in cafes and in homes and doing custom pieces for people. I like to write. I produce a lot on social media. I like to speak and share across the US, and at heart, I'm a traveler that loves to wander the world and take in culture and learn about the way that people are. I'm fascinated by people, and I've now made that my passion and my venture. So, dude, I've got a very, very jagged history across many different pursuits in my life.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit about your background. Like who was Aaron Velke growing up? A little bit about maybe your dad and how he impacted you to be where you are now, whether it's in business, as a father, or whatever it is. So tell me a little bit about the history side of Aaron.
So we grew up in, at least for what I remember, from I'd say early or maybe late elementary school all the way through high school, in a part of Maryland where we were at the junction of a lot of different areas together. So I went to a school in PG County called High Point High School, and a middle school called Martin Luther King Jr. Very, very diverse area. And my dad, being a demolition entrepreneur, did a lot of work in DC, came up to Baltimore. We did work down in Quantico, different Air Force bases, all kinds of things. So his career was largely one that kept him very busy. Mm-hmm. He worked really hard, man. Those jobs started at, sometimes 4 or 5 in the morning. They went till 3. He would come home and then he'd do plans, once I got settled and situated. But he was a hard worker. And starting from the age of 6 or 7, I was a worker too. It wasn't a job, but he took every home that he ever bought and made it way better. He was always taking out walls and adding on decks and, changing windows out and resizing things. We turned a carport into another whole room. We knocked out a brick wall and put a deck on the back of the house. So I've been around that my whole life. Mm-hmm. And I think looking back, there are really 2 things that he taught me without ever sitting me down and teaching me. One was constantly improve. And again, I don't think he ever intended to teach me that. That's just what he did. Constantly improve the place that he lived in, constantly try to grow the business. And then he also taught me to work really hard. Like my work ethic came from watching him, I think, and seeing him. And most of that comes unconsciously because I didn't notice it. I knew he was working. That industry takes a toll on you too. And, wrecked his body. He never learned to take care of himself mentally or physically or emotionally. But what he taught me from his profession was still very valuable. I mean, those were like skills that mattered. But I grew up playing soccer. I grew up doing stuff with my dad. I grew up in the Boy Scouts, which at the time wasn't nearly as cool as playing soccer. So I was always torn. I was like, man, this isn't cool. And then soccer's cool. Like, I just want to skew. But by the time I was, 14, like getting into high school, I guess I was probably 13 getting into high school because I have a late birthday. But getting into high school, like, I had some pretty good skills with my hands. I could fix stuff. Mm-hmm. We'd been outside. We'd been camping. I was around the outdoors a lot. I got to just see and experience a lot. And my dad was often gone from the home. Like, he was just working so much. So my upbringing was largely at the hands of my mom, but it was taught by the work of my father. Mm-hmm. And through high school, I was really isolated. I was like, every part about me was awkward. So not much has changed, but
that's true. That's very true.
Confirmed by Adam. So when the host can confirm it, it's true. But I was lanky. I was intelligent, but I was shy. I was good at school, and that was natural for picking on. I was awkward looking. I was like growing funny. Like, just nothing really fit yet. And high school was a really difficult journey. High school, I was picked on a lot. I was bullied a lot. I didn't fit. I didn't fit in anything. I was in a school where the way that the area pulled in, this is probably the best experience that I could ever have. The way the school was pulling from different areas, the way that diversity was represented in the school was completely opposite of the rest of the world. There were very few white individuals there. There were individuals from Trinidad, Tobago, from Africa, African Americans. There were Latinos. There were some Spaniards. There were South Americans. Like, it was just such a diverse place. And it's probably the thing I'm most grateful for in my childhood. And I don't know that my parents ever like intentionally created that, but it was a beautiful mixing pot. And even though I felt very different, I also got to see culture. I got to see so much happen in that 4 years. I got to be a part of like these like Caribbean cookouts. I got to take part in these like Argentinian like post game celebrations. We played the drums, like empty water coolers on the way back from soccer games that we had won. And it was just a different experience than what most people got. And I didn't recognize that at the time that it was diverse. That's just how I thought the world was, that we were all different and we were all coming together. And, you know, my dad grew up at a time where that wasn't the case. So I was kind of getting information from a lot of different sides about like how the world works. And in high school, I think what I learned the most was that, and this is a skill that I learned directly from my dad, I learned how to talk to people. I learned how to talk to anybody. And he was just such a good, like, charming, friendly person underneath all of the exteriors that he wore. He was a comic that would talk to the person at the grocery store and like make them chuckle and pass a joke on and kind of make fun and light of himself and others in a really healthy way. And I learned to do that in high school. I learned to connect with people, and that young version of Aaron was really damaged, really afraid, really disconnected, but also had a really solid foundation of like being able to handle challenge and what life threw at him.
We got Frank Smallin, a good friend of mine, and also, as with a couple of the previous folks you guys have heard, a GoBundance member as well. Frank and I have actually, we've known each other quite a bit for quite a while. So, Frank, why don't you, I mean, obviously for me, I already know quite a bit about you, but if you can explain a little bit about who you are, your background, both business and as a dad, and then we'll kind of just keep the conversation rolling from there.
Thanks for having me. This is my first podcast, so I'm excited about it.
Woohoo!
I've got a wife and 2 kids, and an 8-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son. I live near Annapolis, Maryland. The actual name of the town I live in is Davidsonville. My business is in Crofton, Maryland, and so I run a few businesses here in this area. One is a manufacturer's rep firm that sells commercial industrial heating equipment. Another one is that one's called United Energy Products, and the other company is a company that installs the chimney products we sell for boilers, water heaters, grease duct generators, and other applications. That's based here in Maryland. I also have 3 companies, one in Florida and one in Texas, one California, that sells the chimney products that we sell here. So we're that's brand new. It's about 18 months old. We're really building that up. I've got a partner in those endeavors, and he handles most of that. I grew up playing lacrosse my whole life, well, at least through college. Mm-hmm. My son's playing lacrosse and soccer now. My daughter is not really into sports, which is nice for not having to drive her around. Like I see all these other families have multiple kids, but it's also cool seeing her do something different, because I was an athlete, and so the singing, the dancing, and the drawing and painting and all the stuff she likes to do is new and definitely interesting to see something new and different. So I feel like I had a great dad. I was very lucky. He was involved in, everything I did. I feel like everything from, I didn't do Boy Scouts. We did something called Y Indian Guides, and he was in that. I remember him being at the meetings and the camping trips. He coached like every sport of mine, probably except for basketball. And he was my lacrosse coach all through youth sports. He never played lacrosse. Well, he did. He was on a team, like a club kind of team in college, and he didn't play in high school. So he was really just on the team to be on the team. But he always loved lacrosse, and so he just dove headfirst into learning the sport so he could coach me and my brothers. And my dad started our business probably when I was like 9. I never really was around it until I graduated from college. It was small and it didn't really have anything for me to come do. I didn't. People ask me all the time if I worked in it. In high school and college, I didn't. There really wasn't. It was small, and there wasn't enough money to go around to, to keep a high school and college kid employed over the summers. But the my growing up, my parents were great. Like, one thing I remember about my dad is he was always there. He never missed any sporting events, any school things. He didn't have to travel a lot for work. I think when I was younger and like 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe he did, but I don't remember that. But because he started a business and it was a local business, just calling the local contractors and stuff, he was around for everything. And then even into college, like, which I'm amazed now that I'm actually working. I played lacrosse. I played all 4 years. Probably played in like 60 games. And he probably made it to over 50 of the 60 games. He would go to, he would travel hours with my mom. I'm saying also with my dad. But they would go all over and they would watch our games. And, there weren't as many parents that were there for everything. So they're always very supportive. They starting a business, you don't have a lot of money, right? They always found a way to put me into, good schools. I went to private school, first to 12th grade, into a private college. So, and they weren't, I would say the first generation works hard. The second generation takes it to the next level, and the third generation spoiled. They come in and ruin it, right? So he was first generation. Like, they didn't have the wealth and that I'm fortunate to have because of all their efforts. Mm-hmm. So I'm very fortunate. Had a very, very good childhood and good college experience. And then coming out, I was lucky to work with my dad for about 20 years. I learned a lot from him over that 20 years. Some things to do and some things not to do, right? So, but it was, I'm lucky to have the dad I have. We get along great. If he was my generation, we'd probably be best friends.
So Joe Wexler on the podcast, he is a good buddy in GoBundance, as you guys are getting intimately familiar with if you've listened to multiple of my episodes. But Joe, I want you to start, kind of just give me a little bit of background on you, your family.
Joe Wexler. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. Been married to Sarah. We're coming up on 15 years this fall, so suddenly 15 years. We have a 10-year-old son named Ben and an 8-year-old daughter named Genevieve. And as you can imagine, those ages are very busy, and we're fortunate to be able to put a lot of energy towards them. So I'll get into all that in a second. For a career, I own a handful of small businesses. I spent a lot of my time before we had kids in management consulting, and I was traveling all over the world, 100% of the time. And once kids started coming, realized that wasn't really sustainable for the way we wanted to live as parents, specifically me. My parents got divorced when I was 5, lived separately. We did like the every other weekend and one weekend a month kind of thing for a while after my mother got remarried. My mother got remarried. That introduced another father figure into my house. They were very, very different people. So my dad sort of laid back and a little bit more passive about things, whereas my stepfather was 100% Italian, off the boat, like hard charger, pretty rough around the edges. And I learned a lot from both of them, to be honest. Like, my stepfather and I bonded pretty well. We did a lot of chores around the house together. We went skiing together. He was very hard on us, but also took very good care of us. So it was a totally different relationship. Definitely not my dad, but one of mutual respect, I think. At least for me. My sister had a little bit of a different experience, I think, at least the way she remembers it. My mom and stepfather actually ended up splitting as well when I was in high school. So that got ripped up. They had a couple of kids together, 2 boys, my brothers. One of them passed away when he was 3. He drowned, and that sort of put a Yeah, I mean, losing a child. I mean, it's crazy. The anniversary was actually earlier this week, 30 years ago. And I was with my other brother who lives in Colorado. So yeah, all pretty tight, but very like interesting things that happened throughout childhood. When I went away to college, by the time I went away to college, I was pretty much independent in a lot of different things. I mean, I couldn't rely on my parents financially, which was fine. I mean, that's not a complaint. It's just the way it was. So I was financially independent from the time I was like 15 or 16, except for the roof over my head in high school. And, you know, it feels like it had been a couple of years of distance between me and my dad that I realized at some point had to be patched. And I sort of had to take the initiative to do that. And it wasn't like there was any event that there was a falling out, but there was just disengagement. And I was growing up, right? I mean, late teens, early 20s, you're out doing your own things. There was, again, the financial aspect where I wasn't getting any help. So, but honestly, when I, you know, probably 21 years old, I just kind of made it a point to reconnect and engage with him more frequently. And he was right there to do it. It wasn't, but I kind of had to be the one leading it. So how any of that influences the way I'm a dad, I have no idea, man.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Where do you want to go with all that?
That's quite the upbringing going through all of that, I would imagine. So, I don't know. I would say that there's almost no way that it doesn't influence you, right? Because your previous experiences, you know, I don't remember who I was listening to, but they're talking about like this conversation between you and me is not a conversation between you and me. It's a conversation between me and everybody else I've ever interacted with, and you and everybody else you've interacted with, and like how we were raised and all the stuff. So like we're looking through things from that lens all the time. So you're going to be looking through things from your stepfather's lens, from your father's lens, from the, you know, loss of a little brother to all sorts of stuff, I would imagine. So the influence, the more we analyze and dig deep, I think the more we find the influences. It's just a matter of, you know, how much we're digging into it. But you mentioned connecting with your father in your 20s, reconnecting back with your father. Now, it doesn't sound like, from what you're saying, that there was like a problem or like issues that you guys weren't talking, just that you weren't really connected. So tell me a bit, like, when you guys reconnected, like, did it feel like it was, you know, just like it used to be? Or, I mean, I don't know if it was like we didn't talk for 5 years or, you know, just some text messages back and forth here and there, or if it was just like literally estranged. Like what did that look like?
Yeah, it wasn't estranged, and it wasn't like we hadn't talked. And this was before cell phones. So texting wasn't a thing, which maybe would have made it easier, to be honest. You know, you had to pick up the phone. I had to be in my room. He had to be at his house. Email wasn't even really that ubiquitous yet. So it makes me sound super old, but it's all true. I'm sure you remember it. But
very much so.
Yeah. So I think it wasn't as if like I had to go back and fix anything. It's just that I had to start being intentional about it. And if he ever felt like we had lost the step, he never articulated that to me. I said he was there. He was like, cool, yeah. As soon as I started engaging, it's not like I had to pull him along. It was easy. And, you know, we've been obviously, like, you know, you get through college, and then I was traveling, I went to grad school, I lived abroad for a while, getting married, all those things. He was part of it, but not necessarily day to day. It's really only the last few years when he moved into the same city we are, where it's been more regular. But yeah, it's awesome. Since then, it's been solid.
So do you take that intentionality? Like, I mean, you were intentional to reach out to your father. Do you take that same intentionality, which, you know, I know a little bit about you, so I'm assuming the answer to this, but do you take that same intentionality when it comes to your kids, to kind of make sure that you are an intentional father in their life?
Yeah. I mean,
and what does that look like?
1000%. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm excited to hear all your other guests talk about this too, because I'll always learn better ways or different ways to go about that. There's just a million quotes you could say, like, what, 20 years from now, the only people that are going to remember you worked late are your kids, you know, things like that. I mean, yeah, I mean, I focus so much of my energy every day on being present when they're around, and being intentional about being here when they're around, and stepping away. Now, I'm not perfect at it by any stretch, but without that intentionality, I'd be afraid of what it would look like, especially with all the access we have of phones and like connectivity and all that stuff. So, super intentional, and try new things all the time. Like, I think I put on my goals for the year on the one sheet, and other places, no cell phone, or cell phone use only between the hours of 8 a.m. and 4 p.m., which is the time when they're at school.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that bleeds to 5 p.m. depending on the day, and then again after like 8:30 p.m. Right. So waking up with them in the morning, being here for breakfast, for school bus, for shuttle transportation back into school,
Mm-hmm.
and then being able to engage in work, and then being here as many times as I can when they get home from school, do an afternoon snack and playing with them until through dinner and all that. So, I mean, that's super intentional about that. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. The intentionality thing, if you're intentional in one part of your life, you tend to be intentional in other parts of your life, and I think that's it. Where do you think you picked that up? Because like listening to your background, like you didn't necessarily have that, growing up through high school and into college. It sounded like, I don't know, where do you think you picked up the intentionality part of your life, right? Because that seems to be important now. We have on a fantastic guest, a dad, a father of two kids, Courtney Atkinson. Thank you so very much for joining me, Courtney. So if you can, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little background on your family, and then I'd love for you to kind of dive in on where you came from. Like, give us a little bit of background on your dad and how he impacted where you are today.
Yeah, I'm a real estate team leader. We have a team of a little over 50 agents in 3 markets. Pretty big team by volume. We'll sell a couple $100 million a year. Also have a coaching company for real estate agents, brokers, team leaders. I've been doing that for a good amount of time, and having a lot of fun at the man. Like my biggest hope is that my young kids, Carson and Conrad, are now 6.5 and 8. Want to be in that business, and that I can create a business that they might be desirous of stepping into. So that's kind of my primary objective. I love the work that I do, and they're excited about the prospect of maybe being business owners one day. So I'm excited to, inspire them to be entrepreneurs. And, growing up, man, I kind of, one of the most constant images I have of my dad is going door to door, raising money for charity, just hustling for Rotary Club or for whatever it was, just to build funds for community projects, whether it be, tennis courts or parks or, whatever it was that they happened to be working on at the time. And I remember going out on evening, nights, and weekend with him doing that, and just always had this like tremendous sense of community, and was always like a civic advocate, and, always volunteering. And so I think that was in him from a very young age, being, a farm boy from the sticks, where you really depended on your community to come together and support you in times of hardship, of which there were many back in those days. And I think he carried that forward in as many ways as he could with his limited income being a teacher, but he was quite successful as a high school principal, and then ultimately retired. And now he's having a great time selling cars, and we share that passion as well. So, I mean, there's a gazillion stories in there, as most of us have over the years. I've left out the part where I had an overdose at the age of 12. I left out the part where I got caught with drugs a bunch of times. I left out the part where I crashed a bunch of cars. I've left out a lot of parts in there, but the fact is my dad was a heck of a man during all those times.
Today's guest is a good buddy of mine, Camille. I've known Camille for maybe 3 years, something like that. I have loved, Camille, watching you as a dad. Like we were saying right before the recording started. You've got 2 beautiful daughters. It's been just a fun family to watch and be around. So I want to kind of let the audience get to know you a little bit, have a good conversation with you, chatting about business and dadhood. But first, tell us a little bit about your family. Introduce your family and yourself to everybody, and we'll start from there.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor, Adam. So thank you so much for thinking me in this aspect of life and
Yes.
journey. So awesome. So I am married. So I'm a Polish immigrant. Married to Patricia. She's also Polish. We've met here in the States though since '04. We got married, but we've been together since about '97. She thinks '96. I'm convinced it was '97 because that '96 year was wild for me. There's no way I was already in a relationship. Just kidding.
But yeah, not really.
So,
Yes.
not really. So quite a bit of time with my lovely Patricia. We've had Natalia in 2007, so she's 16 now, and then Nell. So two girls. Yeah, I didn't have like any wishes around having boys versus girls. I just kind of took it as it was. I was just excited to be a dad, and those two munchkins showed up, and the adventure of fatherhood was just for me it was amazing. It still is actually, obviously. So yeah, that's our family unit.
That's awesome. Yeah, watching you and your daughters. Well, there was one Fambundance thing because that you guys did like the dance
Yeah.
thing, and it was phenomenal to watch. So you pull the girl dad off thing pretty well. Like I was telling you, I'm gonna have to give you a call through all the moments because since we just had our girl 8 weeks ago, it's like I don't know what the heck I'm going to do now. Like even changing a diaper, I had to phone a friend and be like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing here. This is ridiculous. But since all I had was boys. But so tell me a little bit about your dad. This is actually something I don't know anything about you at all, any of your the background of that front. But tell me a little bit about your dad and your upbringing a little bit, so I can kind of start with the basics there.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in a village, actually, very tiny little village in the southeast region of Poland, right there where Ukraine is now, and Slovakia. So it was a border of Russia and Slovakia back in the day. And my childhood was amazing because you live out there. There's just freedom. Very little adult supervision. You're climbing trees, swimming in rivers. It was amazing. My dad met my mom because he got stationed there. He was in the army, and we then moved to a bit of a larger town / smaller city, about an hour bus ride away from the village. So I was there between 8 and 13, and at 13 I came to the States. So overall, very kind of lower middle class. That was not. There was no classes of that sort in Poland because it was communism. Everybody was equal, so everybody was whatever class. And then after communism fell, we tried. My dad had a good job. He was an attorney-ish because he didn't work private sector. He worked corporate. My mom was a teacher. Had a good relationship with both of them. Then my mom left to America in 1990. So I'm 10 years old. My brother's 12. And next 3 years between 90 and 93, before we left to America, it was just us and my dad. So we actually never really sat down and like talked about those times with my dad. But if I had to guess, he was freaking figuring it out the best he could. Cause it was sketchy at points. But it made me grow up faster. It made my brother grow up faster. Like I said, he did the best we could. He took us camping. We were still close to my grandma, so we spent weekends there. So there was still that whole family connection, family unit. And overall, the Polish culture, like the Eastern European culture, there isn't the emotions are not so evident between parents, kids, families. Like you don't say "I love you" to each other. You don't hug it out that much, if at all. So that's the culture I was brought up. But there was love in the household, no doubt about it. Yeah. yeah. And those 3 years when we were by ourselves, like I said, there were some sketchy moments, but nothing, nothing that would, that would consider like dramatic.
Yeah.
One or two incidences, but yeah, he was good. He was good, and now I go to see him every 2 years, and we have a great relationship. I mean, we're men, so we don't call each other every other day. We'll touch base once every 6 months, and then I'll go see him for a couple of weeks. But I would say positive, good influence. He was a martial artist. I took that away. I'm a long life martial artist. So he was a very good and positive influence. Whether it was some of these sketchy situations, but still empowered me to be a man at an earlier age, which I consider a benefit. I consider that a part of the journey on the positive side. Or his, or the times he took us camping and hung out and was a great dad. He always was a great dad, but even more so. So overall, very positive.
We have on Tim Vest. He's an entrepreneur, dad. Let's start off just, Tim, you telling us a little bit about yourself, telling everybody who it is that we're talking to today, your family, your business or businesses in your case, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Thanks for having me on. So Tim Vest, got a few different things that I do. I have a company called Harvest Properties Group that I founded a while back. We purchase and operate real estate, mostly in the multifamily and triple net space, and primarily in the Carolinas, since that's where I'm located. So North, South Carolina, and Georgia is where we mostly do what we do. I'm also a co-founder of Making Moves Real Estate Coaching with my business partner, Tim Vitale. And we coach folks on real estate, kind of getting that first big deal across the finish line, if you will. And then one of the other things that I own, so I have a podcast and a small group called Barbaric Yacht that I founded, that's focused on just kind of working with folks, kind of getting through the entrepreneur world and kind of making your own voice known.
I always like to ask is to tell us a little bit about your dad, kind of how you grew up. One of the things that I like to think through is we all have kind of a wireframe in our brain that was built over the years of us living, and anytime an experience happens, we go back to that wireframe, and whether that's good or bad, sometimes we have to adjust it. But like, where did your wireframe start? How did you kind of start your fatherhood experience by dealing with your father? Tell me a little bit about growing up with your dad.
Yeah, so my dad's a Carolina guy. Like, our family's been in the Carolinas since the early 1800s. My dad grew up on the farm. His parents were rather poor, sharecroppers. He used to drive us around and show us the houses he grew up in, which were really like sheds or small one-room barns and stuff like that. So, as a kid, I can remember kind of driving around the roads in North Carolina and having my dad show me these things. And I started to develop a real understanding of the kind of guy he was, right? He went to some small school. I think he was 15th out of 16 kids who graduated. And he would have told you, hey, without my mom, he would have never gone off to college. He just didn't have that wasn't a goal for him, right? Like, that wasn't even something he thought was possible, but he was first person in his class, first person in his family to go to college. Same thing with my mom. And, my dad was an extremely hard worker. For a guy that graduated 15th at a very small high school, he, out of 16 kids, he ended up with, like 3 bachelor degrees, 2 graduate degrees. He had a degree from Carson Newman in the seminary. He was a Southern Baptist minister for quite some time. He was involved with the police force. He was a police officer, and then he ended up being a teacher. Wow. For most of the time that I spent with him, he was a teacher in the vocational programs. I don't think a lot of people know that high schools used to have vocational programs where they would teach kids how to be a mechanic, work on washing machines, that kind of stuff. So my dad would help kids find jobs, the kids that probably weren't going off to college. He would kind of educate them on those types of things and then help them get some sort of vocational track going on. My dad was always really, really strongly involved with the community. Always involved with the church. He was the kind of guy like that. He would leave on Saturdays at like 10 a.m. to go check the mail. Right, check the mail. The post office was 2 miles from our house, and 4 hours later he'd come home. And it's because he'd stopped at the post office, talked to the guy behind the counter for an hour, and went somewhere else, and somebody else talked to him. And that's just the kind of guy he was. So, I grew up seeing that. And then the other thing I grew up with is, my buddies used to kid me because they'd ask me about, hey, did you see Looney Tunes or whatever on Saturday? I'm like, man, I don't watch cartoons on Saturday. My dad gets me out of bed at like 6 a.m. and we're in the woods cutting wood and splitting firewood for people and delivering loads of wood. We didn't have, my parents were teachers, so we didn't have much. And that was like one of the ways my dad made money, doing wood. We'd go down to the beach, the North Carolina beaches in the summer, and build decks for people to make extra money. We would do kind of like small little side construction jobs around town to make extra money. And it was that kind of stuff that I think kind of started to develop my entrepreneurial side, to develop my little side hustle side too, as well. I've always looked for, because of that, I've always been looking for like different ways to like supplement income, or like, hey, I can do this over here and make a couple $100. But it also taught me, I learned a lot of things too. Growing up, I learned how to cut wood. I learned how to build decks. I learned how to, frame, do framing, do drywall. Oddly enough, my dad used to stick me with the drywall work. We'd put the drywall up and then we'd mud it, and he'd say, I'm getting ready to run to the store. Why don't you start sanding? And, he'd come back 2 hours later. I'm covered head to toe in drywall dust. And I'm like, I guess I'm done,
That's funny.
So we used to do that kind of stuff all the time. One of the other things I saw, I was a little young for this, but I do remember it, is, again, I mentioned we didn't have a whole lot. We were pretty poor. My dad wanted, us to have our own home. So he bought these books. I still have them in, my other office in my house. It was these construction books, and it's like 22 volumes. And he read these books and then built our house from the ground up. It was basically a summer project, a little bit longer than one summer. But, when school got out, we started digging the holes, started digging the place for the foundation. And then he started laying bricks, and the house I grew up in, my dad built. And so that's kind of the guy he was. He and I were really, 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 really close. Unfortunately, my senior year of high school, right about a week before Christmas, my dad passed away. And, that was, if we're talking about, something that kind of shows how close we were, it was a pretty hard time for me. I always tell folks, probably one of the biggest mistakes I made was going off to college that first year, because, man, I was not in the right headspace for that. Right. That's kind of the relation, it kind of speaks a little bit to the relationship I had with my dad. I carry a lot of that forward though, like when I'm doing real estate stuff, some of the flipping I've done, some of the stuff I've done in my own house, I've done a lot of that stuff because he taught it to me, right? Like I learned that from him. He was one of those guys that I would kind of say to him, I used to get really frustrated with him. I would be like, man, I need to change the oil in my car. And he'd go, well, go change the oil in your car, and I'd go outside and start. And ultimately, I'd run into something I couldn't do. And that's when he would come out and help. But he was always kind of one of those guys, like, you go try. And when you run into a roadblock, I'll help you. Right. Yeah. But he always kind of wanted that. He always kind of wanted you to have that. I'm going to start. I want you to try to solve the problem. And then, I'm here to help if you run into something you can't do. So I think that probably sums it up.
Yeah, that's incredible. So I see sarcastically stating, you certainly didn't learn hard work ethic from your father, right? Like, goodness gracious, that is insane. Like,
man, that guy. So when my oldest brother went off to college, my dad was teaching, 7 to 3 o'clock. He would come home, grab a couple hours of sleep, and then he would head off to the bag plant. And he was a third shift manager at the bag plant near our house. And he would basically work from, I think it was like 10:30 or 11 to 6:30 or 7 in the morning, then leave straight from there and go teach for the day. And it was all to make money to help my brother get through school.
Mm-hmm.
I learned quite a bit about work ethic from him.
Yeah, no
that's
kidding.
for sure. Yeah,
that's awesome. And I mean, I think that, I don't know, it's one of those that I talk to a lot of people and they're like, well, how am I going to get my kid to have this hard work ethic and do all these things? And especially given the environment. So I grew up in a rather, I don't want to say poor, but we certainly did not have money growing up. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then, so my kids are going to be growing up in a different life, than I grew up in. So like teaching the work ethic stuff. So, I mean, I'm not putting up as much drywall. I'm not changing the oil the way I used to. I'm not doing a lot of this stuff. So it's like, boy, those are such good skills for me to learn. And, so like, how do I build that into my kid's life? And, I don't know, it's one of those that's a constant battle in my brain on what I do want to include and what I don't want to include in my kid's life. Welcome to the Biz Dad podcast. Today I have a fellow military friend of mine, as well as a business owner, real estate guy, just all around awesome dude in GoBundance as well. But Doug Spence is with us today. I want to let him introduce himself. Doug, please just kind of say hello, introduce your family, who you are, a little bit of background on you and your business, and we'll go from there.
My name is Doug Spence. I'm originally from Houston, Texas. Did my undergrad at Baylor University, and then joined the Navy back in 2009. Was a aviation guy, so went to flight school for a couple of years in Pensacola, and then selected Super Hornets and went out to Lemoore, California for a year. Then moved out to Japan for 3 years, did 3 carrier deployments. Then moved to Pensacola, Florida to be a flight instructor. Did that for 3 years. Which is also where I met my wife, Kate. She is a Navy JAG. We're both active duty Navy. And then moved to San Diego in December of 2018. Was at SEAL Team 3 for 2 years, running their JTAC program, so Joint Terminal Attack Controller. For those of you that aren't in the military, it's basically how you bring effects from aircraft onto the ground or artillery onto the ground. Or the surface, because it could be on the ocean as well. And then now I'm back at an aviation command now, a non-flying aviation command, doing a department head tour now here in San Diego. We've been in San Diego for 4.5 years now. And then I got into real estate back in 2016 when I was in Pensacola. So that's where I bought my first property, really where I got addicted to real estate. And I've been surrounding myself with people that feed that addiction ever since. So it's only gotten worse, right? And just been doing real estate on the side while I'm active duty. And then we have our son, Calvin. He was born on Cinco de Mayo, 2022 last year. So he's a little over a year now. Nice. And he's awesome. And so now just, juggling being a dad, being a husband, Navy guy, real estate investor, all that stuff. So, but it's been great. It's been quite a journey.
Tell me a little bit about your dad, your upbringing, kind of how that kind of brought you to where you are now, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever you want to share with the beginning parts of all this, how it started.
Yeah. So, overall, good upbringing. My parents divorced when I was 11. And so there was, the whole going from house to house thing, but I think my parents handled it pretty well. It was, not too, traumatic. It's not like some of those divorces you hear about where they're just like screaming at each other and, there's a lot of, the cops are getting called. Like it wasn't anything like that. So, so that was good overall. And my dad was very frugal. So that was one very valuable thing that I learned from my dad in particular was frugality. He was he's kind of frugal, but like to an extreme. So I've had to kind of correct back. My wife has helped me with that. She's frugal too, but she's also, appreciates like living life, so she's really helped me with that, and not just like, you don't have to save, 70% of everything you earn, now that kind of mindset, because I've been able to have a roughly 50% savings rate the entire time I've been in the military. Nice. So like over 14 years. So, that has been very beneficial for me, like financially, just having that habit of frugality. So that's one thing I learned from my dad that was really beneficial. But not a big feelings guy. So that's been something I've had to learn. Like, kind of a downside is like, it's okay to express emotion and all that kind of stuff. And my personality is very, I don't know how much of this is nature versus nurture. Probably a lot of nature, but I'm very logical. On some of those personality tests, I'm like 10 on logical, 1 on emotions, and I don't know how much of that is like military as well, where it's just like, there is zero value in the military, and like, well, tell me how that, that flight we did, how did you feel when we were, that doesn't matter, right? It's just like, how did it go? We need to, here are the things that you messed up. Here's how we need to get better, for the sake of the squadron, for the sake of the mission, et cetera. So it's like, I don't know how much of that is just me and how much of that is just beat into me from being in the military. Same with like communication, like communication style, very direct, matter of fact, not, it doesn't matter what your feelings are about something. It matters what happened and how we can get better, et cetera. So, definitely some pros and cons, like everyone, learning from their parents and from their dad. But, overall, I'm not a drug addict. I'm not a alcoholic. I'm not, so I think, overall, I think they did a pretty good job.
Awesome. Yeah, you're just a real estate addict. So that's a plus.
Yeah, just a real estate addict. Now, I did not learn any real estate stuff from them. So that was one thing that, they taught me frugality, and they were good at, they impressed upon me, don't have credit card debt. Don't, make sure you're living beneath your means. Basically the foundations of like getting to zero and staying above zero, but not how to build wealth. It was more like, okay, put some money in like money market or index funds, like if you have some left over, but that was pretty much the extent of that. So the real estate stuff I learned from like everyone else. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, I think like in high school or something, like a long time ago, or college or something, like pretty soon after it came out, and then was introduced to Bigger Pockets probably back in like 2015, 2016. And then that's Bigger Pockets is how I started learning about it. And then I was like, damn, there's, you don't have to be a gajillionaire to like own real estate. I didn't know that. So learning about real estate through Bigger Pockets, and then buying my first house, and then seeing like, oh wow, like, doing the taxes myself on the first property. I was like, wow, this is really good. Like I understand that, what they're saying about this now. So then just kind of got the bug from there. So didn't really learn building wealth from my parents, but they helped me get to zero and then start to save. So that by the time I learned about real estate, I had some money saved up and I had good credit and all that stuff. So it really set a good foundation for me. That's something that my dad definitely did not teach me, is generosity, that I've had to kind of like, and Eco Abundance has been huge with that, because when I first did my one sheet, it was like genuine contribution, and it was nothing. And so that inspired me to, because I wasn't comfortable. Sorry, we're kind of going off something else here, but like, I wasn't as comfortable giving money away, because like, I don't know where that's going. Like, is it actually going to help someone or not? Like, maybe in the future I'll be involved with or I have a buddy that's involved with some kind of charity where it's like, okay, I know where the money's going. Like, I'm more comfortable giving money. But so I was like, okay, I can give my time. How can I give my time? And so like, I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And I started doing it last year, is I give my time to other military members looking to grow their real estate portfolio, just learn about real estate. So I think last year I did a little over 53 hours of free mentoring for military folks. And I just, whatever I think in my one sheet I calculated that's like, I don't know, $190 an hour or something. So then I just count that as my genuine contribution for the year, and it ended up being like $8,300 or, something like that. And then it's been like awesome. I've really enjoyed doing that. But if it wasn't for Abundance, I wouldn't have done something like that. And then now, using my real estate knowledge to help others is like, the compound effects of that long term are like, I think a lot more than just giving $200 to some charity. So but yeah, that kind of ties into what you were talking about with like generosity. And that's something I'm definitely going to do is like, it's important to give to people, whether it's time or money or, some combination of both that I did not have growing up really. So,
we didn't really have anything to give, so it was one of those like we had a tendency to be the ones that people needed to give to growing up, and now it's a blessing to be able to give to other folks. But I struggle the same thing with giving money. I always have struggled giving money, just because to your point, I don't, especially like I always feel for the person on the corner asking for help, right? But I cannot bring myself to give them money. I will gladly go buy you 5 bags of groceries for $200 before I give you 10, because I don't know where that 10 is going to go.
Right. It is not hurting them or helping them.
Exactly. Like I could be giving you money that's going to put you right around the corner to go buy some drugs, or we can go to the store. I can, buy you a meal right now and prepare you, for some stuff, They're
like, dude, I don't want these apples.
I bought a guy once, and it was a good humbling experience as well as an angering experience. So it took me a little while to get rid of the anger and not really anger, but frustration, irritation. We were in Ohio, super cold outside. I've always been one that likes to give. I even if I don't, like, probably to a fault when I was a paycheck to paycheck guy, because I was already spending all of my money. So, but I give some away too. So that's, I guess it's a plus. No, I know it's a plus, but, so I bought this guy, gloves, socks, like he was a homeless guy walking around. I bought him some gloves, I bought him some socks, and I bought him some food. And, like he had no gloves on, his boots were all beat up, and I handed him the stuff, and he looks in it and he's like, "Really? This is what I get?" And then he walked away, and I was like, wow, way to make me not want to help anybody ever again. But I realized like it took me a while, but like his mental state was somewhere way different than mine. Like, but it also taught me like, okay, well, what does he actually need? Clearly he didn't need, what's up, buddy? Like clearly he didn't need gloves and socks. Like maybe I should have asked him, what is it? How can I best support you? Right. Because I just assumed instead of trying to figure it out and take care of him the way that he needed it. Welcome to the Biz Dad podcast. Today I have a good friend of mine. We spent a solid week together doing some fun Tony Robbins event and having a great time. But he is another amazing dad to chat with, fantastic business owner. I look forward to him kind of sharing his knowledge. So Anthony, I'm going to turn it over to you. Kind of give us an introduction, who you are, your family, kind of your business, and let's roll from there.
I'm a business owner. I have 2 martial arts schools and a gym. Our gym specifically works with children. I used to work with children and adults, but one of my favorite quotes is, "It's easier to build strong children than to fix broken men." And that's by Frederick Douglass. And I truly believe that. And I made it my mission in life to give parents and kids the tools to know that they are enough. So hopefully, if anybody's watching this, I'm sure that you can have some good, solid takeaways. Now, some of my background is I'm a lifelong martial artist. I was an alternate for 2 Olympic Games. I was number 1 in the United States for about 10 years in the sport of Taekwondo. I run 2 martial arts schools, and we teach boxing, Krav Maga, Taekwondo, and Jiu-Jitsu, and Kali. But that's not what we really teach. What we really teach is character development. So prior to starting this podcast, we were talking about my specialty. My specialty is to work on the psychology of children, giving them the tools, the 80% between the ears, not the 20%, which is their mechanics. I made it a mission that my goal for the kids was not to compare. As well as sport is important. I have a beautiful wife who is a 4th degree black belt. She was a World University Games silver medalist in Taekwondo. We met over 20 years ago. My daughter is the youngest black belt we've ever had in our school. Obviously, by default, it's not because of nepotism, but because in the Graff family, we're about consistency, and they are not allowed to miss a day. It's more important that they are consistent, because at the end of the day, they need to have those 10,000 hours in, and they're going to realize that the difference makes of whoever it is, whether be in business or whether it be in sport. If you put more time in, you will get further ahead. And my wife, she's a martial artist and also a fantastic photographer. We're both really into fitness. Our house is a gym, spa, whatever you want to call it, because all we do is care about our wellness and trying to get ourselves better. And not only do we do it for ourselves, but we do it because we know that the kids are watching. When did you finally get to learn that about your dad?
I was an adult. I was definitely older before I learned any of it, right? So, and that's when I really started to click in my brain, like, wow, I didn't realize, growing up, it was one of those, oh, my dad just doesn't understand this, or he just doesn't care about that, and blah, blah, blah. And then you realize later on, like, he was doing the absolute best he possibly could with what he was given. He had no good framework to be a good dad. So, he provided for us, and he worked, and that was what he knew to do. Like, he never beat us. He never hit us. He gave, he provided a roof over our head. That was a success in his brain, and
it's so
that's
funny
never what he
that.
saw. So,
and it's so challenging when, when a father passes too soon and somebody's not able to get that moment with, and I see that moment with my father, because my father had like this pain toward his dad. Obviously his dad was like, I'm talking pre-World War II, like born in the 1900s. I mean, he carried a knife with him. My dad never opened up about this stuff, but my aunt told me that, one day he came home and he cut my father, with a knife, because they carried knives back then. I don't know if you ever watched World War II stuff, and like everybody carried a knife like that. Like that was a part of the culture, and he cut my father. But my father is like now empathy. He was probably a jerk teen, right? Coming at, trying to whatever it may be, and probably be put in his place. But he died in my dad's arms, his father, when he was 22.
Wow.
And I just think about 22 prior, you're still an adolescent and you don't have this ability to forgive or understand. I can only imagine that he made it another 20 years. My father's perspective may have shifted, right? He could have had these conversations like I did this with him. But, when I had these conversations with my dad for the first time, it was when we drove to Colorado and I went out to the Olympic Training Center, and I was 19 years old. And that's when things shifted with me in my life, because I was able to actually listen to my dad's side. And I can only empathize because he never was able to get that experience with his father. Does that make sense? I can only imagine that the machismo. I'm using a Spanish word, right? Of a man who was born in the 1800s, trying to open up to his son. That's not happening, right? Until you become a broken man and you're close to death, and then you can get kind of start to do that. But that's the challenging part, right? That's a lot. But eventually, I totally get that, because as we're older men, and I asked you because I have a very similar story, and I figured by the time we start understanding it, we are, the adolescent brain develops to the age of 24. So when we start to hear the story, we're closer to either men, or we're closer to men, and we understand the perils of men and the idea of being a provider, and understanding that this is in my nature to be here for somebody else. And sometimes we have this hindsight and we don't think about feelings.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And we don't want to talk about it at that point either, right? Because we've got so much testosterone flowing through our body. It's like, I'm talking about my feelings, you out of your mind, And then of course that testosterone leads to the more disdain for what's going on, and it just, what a mess, It's if we can break the cycle early and have that conversation early, that's all the better, right? We have Jamie Gruber on the podcast today. So Jamie and I have known each other for, 5 years, something like that, between a couple of different masterminds that we've been in. But I'm really excited to have Jamie on. He's another GoBundance guy, another real estate business owner, that type of guy. So to kick it off, Jamie, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, what kind of business / businesses you're involved in.
I am almost 13-year happily married man. My wife Sylvia and I met each other while working together in Boston. She actually worked for me, and then I claimed her because that's just how I roll. Yeah. We have 2 young boys, 8 and 5. Sebastian, both boys. Sebastian's 8, Julian's 5. We have this little family thing. We call ourselves the G4, the Gruber 4, and each of us is born in a different place. So I'm born in New York. My wife was born in the Dominican Republic. My first son was born in Boston. My second son was born in Michigan. But fun fact, if you consider your dog's children, we have 2 of those as well that are 13 and 11. They also were born in Boston. So we have 3 of the G6 in Boston. But of the human G4, there's nobody lives in the same place. So that's us. We are at this point, I guess, a nomadic family. We can get into that, and we enjoy a lot of time together. As far as my businesses, so my first business is, or the top of my funnel, if you will, in my world is I host the Tribe of Millionaires podcast. It's in partnership with GoBundance. I've been a member for 4+ years, and a lot has happened in my life that I credit GoBundance for. So I partnered up and I have some businesses with them. So people get to know me through the podcast. When they know me and like me enough, they tend to join the GoBundance Emerge community, which I own. So GoBundance Emerge is sort of the feeder program for future millionaires. We create whole life millionaires, I like to say, and people will join that. From there, I'm partnered with Quantum Capital. We invest in value add, distressed BC class workforce housing, multifamily housing in Denver, Austin, a little bit in LA. And that's kind of the funnel of my business, if you will, or all of my businesses in one funnel. And that's, I think, the nutshell of it.
So one thing I did not ask you about, but it helped open up the door a little bit in understanding, who you are. Tell me a little bit about your dad, kind of your upbringing, how that worked. What did he do? Tell me about just kind of your life growing up with your father.
Yeah, my dad was a plumber. He's still alive. He's 75 years old. He was a plumber. We lived on Long Island when I was first born till about the age of 10, I think. Then we moved to upstate New York. But he was hardworking. I mean, that's what he did. My dad was probably very, very, standard for the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s dad in some ways. Stoic, mom took care of the kids. Dad didn't. Dad worked a lot. Dad was the disciplinarian. You had to choose your own strap. If you screwed up, it wasn't. I find in life that your memory as a child of your upbringing and your parents' memory of your upbringing, like they're both wrong. The truth lies somewhere in between. Like what I would see and then say to them, they'd be like, no, that's not what it was. Like they're not wrong. I'm not wrong, but the truth lies somewhere in between. So to me, when he got mad, man, that belt came out and it was like, 20 lashings, but it was probably like 2-3 swats on the butt and then it was over. But it was terrifying at that age. But that was him. He was, we actually said to my parents, my mom at one point, my mom told the story recently. Me and my sister said to my mom, does dad have any teeth? Because he just wouldn't smile. Not that he wasn't a happy guy or whatever, but he's not a very outspoken dude. He doesn't talk a lot. And he'd come home. I mean, he worked, 16-hour days, right? And he'd come home for dinner and he'd just sit at the end of the table. Mom made the food, put it on the table. She cooked, she cleaned. He just, ate and brought the money home. And he would just eat his food. He wouldn't say anything, just kind of be there. Doesn't mean I didn't have interactions, but we play. I remember going to a football game with me, coming to my soccer games from time to time. But he was very much, my parents, both of them, very much believed in a wide gap between the parent and the child. And meaning, this is parent stuff. You are children. My mother's famous saying is children are to be seen, not heard. And that we lived that way. Kid, we had a fun life. We, like a lot of people say today at our age, like, I would leave at 8:00 in the morning in the summer. I'd be home at 7:00 at night. Like parents didn't know where I was. That was my life. But my dad was, he was stoic, hardworking. He was a disciplinarian. He also spoiled us heavily because he grew up. His dad was a heavy gambler, heavy drinker. He had 5 siblings. He was the second of 6. He didn't have any stability at home. He lived with teachers. He lived with friends. Like there was just no stability at home. So I think something that he valued heavily was creating a stable home for us. And part of that was anything we wanted. I wanted a Nintendo. I got the Nintendo. My sister wanted a ring. She got the ring. Like it wasn't, what was he making? $40,000 a year? I mean, back then that's good living, but it's not like, we weren't rich. We were middle class, but he would find a way all the time. He would Spoil, spoil, spoil. That was his thing. That was how he showed love, how he felt like, because he had nothing. He wanted to give us everything. But that was him. Still is.
Yeah. Well, awesome. So what, pulling back from that, kind of what did you, because you are not quiet. You're not, we all know you have teeth. You know, you like to smile, you like to talk, you like to go out and do that kind of. For those of you only listening, yes, he's showing off his big white teeth. So
I have big teeth. Man.
But tell me, like, what is it that you think, especially now? So for me, once I became an adult and kind of started looking at things a little bit differently and understanding where my dad came from, it really helped me understand a little bit more about who he is and who he was and why he was the way he was, which helped kind of impact me as far as being a father and where I'm looking at. So have you had a similar thought process looking back at your dad and who he was and where he came from as to why he did what he did, and like some sort of I don't want to say reckoning, because like I forget who the way it's said or what it is, but like when you're real young, you idolize your dad. As you grow up, you start to, disdain, you have some disdain for your father as, you go through your teenage years and early 20s, that type of thing. And then you start to understand, and then you relate, and then you're back to kind of idolizing again. I'm butchering that, but it took me a while going through that to really understand who my dad was and help me kind of put some perspective on life. Did you have any similar moments or anything like that?
Kids did it. Yeah, my dad and I didn't have an estranged relationship in any way. Again, when I was a kid, he was just disciplined. When I got into my teenage years, I didn't want my parents around, honestly. He abided by that. He was good about it. I mean, he was around, but my point is, I don't know. They're not cool, right? Like, that's what you're doing in teenage years.
Yeah. And
as I became an adult, we have a good relationship. To this day, we have a good relationship. When I became a dad, I'm sure all of us have this experience where I can hear myself when I'm disciplining my kids or yelling at my kids or talking to my kids, right? I can hear myself. I sound exactly like my father. But I guess I could have never understood or I could have never appreciated the amount of fear that there is in being a father. So I feel it. That's how I feel. When somebody says, like, my kid the other day, we're walking down the street on the sidewalk, my 5-year-old, and I am a hawk on that kid, especially him, with walking on the sidewalk. It's kind of close to the road. It's not a busy road, but there's cars that go by. And if he steps even a little bit off the sidewalk, I freak. And my wife is always like, calm down. It's going to be fine. But it's fear. So my dad would freak out on us. And at the time, I just thought, like, he's just like angry. My God, what is there to be so angry about? But again, he values his family. He valued his family so much that it's fear, and I have the same issue. Like the idea that my kid gets hit by a car with right in front of me, that image, that crazy, disgusting, psychotic image it scares the heck out of me. And because it scares the heck out of me, I don't ever want to see that happen. So I will react with rage or anger or whatever, but I'll react probably poorly or overreact in that moment. And for them, I can imagine it's the same as I felt. Like, God, Dad's always yelling, in that situation. It's like, nah, Dad's scared. And the difference is I've explained that to my kids. I don't know if they get it or if they care, but at least I've said it. My father never, I didn't get there was no birds and the bees conversation. There was nothing. My dad wasn't that guy. My dad was, you were born, you got a room, you got clothes, leave me alone. Right? Like, that was kind of his way of looking at it. But yeah, I think understanding that fear and relating to him from that perspective, like, wow, all right, so this guy was just scared. Whenever I did something stupid that could get me hurt, he was scared. He wasn't mad to be mad. He was scared. He was afraid for me. So that was a big epiphany.
I have a fellow veteran, father, real estate investor, business-minded guy. I'm really looking forward to getting to know Stu a little bit better. But we got Stu Grazier on the podcast. Stu, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little about your family, a little bit about your business, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Stu Grazier. I am a husband to my beautiful bride, Crystal. We've been married. August will be our 15th year anniversary. And then we have 2 amazing children, 8-year-old daughter, her name is Collins, and a 5-year-old son, his name is Wells. Or if you ask him, he's 5.5. You got to make sure that the half is in there.
It needs to be there.
And, I've dedicated my life to really being the best husband, the best father, and just the best leader that I could possibly be in the community. I'm a veteran. I retired from the Navy after 20 years of service last June of 22.
Congrats.
Thanks, man. So I flew helicopters for about 10 years, and then I transitioned and flew C-40s or like a Boeing 737 as well. And then lastly, like you said, real estate investor, own multiple businesses. Started doing investing when I was right out of college in flight school in Pensacola. I started investing in real estate, and I've tried about every asset, every niche, every strategy that I could possibly do. I've failed a lot. I've learned a lot, but somewhere along those lines, I've found some success in a few things too. So happy to talk about kind of managing businesses while active duty, and now managing businesses while being a focused husband and dad.
So you mentioned that your parents went through a divorce when you were a kid. Tell me a little bit about your dad and the divorce and how that kind of if how you thought about it then, how you think about it now, kind of what kind of impacts that had on you.
Yeah, man. I'll probably get a little bit vulnerable here, but that's okay. So my parents divorced when I was 5 years old. At the time, didn't really know what to think about it, what to do about it. They had split, and my dad ended up deciding to move to a different state. And so they had, kind of visiting rights. So I didn't spend a whole lot of time with my dad because he had moved away. So my mom had full custody. So for a long time, my mom was just a single mom with two kids. And I have a younger sister, and she did everything for us. She ran everywhere. We were super active in our schools. We had lots of extracurricular activities, lots of sports. Both my sister and I were big into sports and playing about anything and everything, we could try. She was just running all over the place. So she was an amazing mom. And then I would go and see my dad. Summers we'd go spend a month with him. He lived in New Mexico at the time. I lived in Texas at the time. And then we'd go a week during Christmas and then a month in the summertime. And, over time, it's hard. It's hard to not have a father figure in your life, for, especially in those early years where there's so much that a dad can be there for, right? To be there to support you in your sports, to show a boy how to do man stuff, right?
Yeah.
So eventually my mom did remarry. She remarried when I was 12 years old, and we ended up moving to Central Texas. My stepfather, he'd already had kids. He was a little bit older, so he had kind of gone through the round of being a dad and having kids. And he was supportive. He'd show up to my baseball games and football games and be there, but he wasn't like incredibly engaged. He wasn't going to be like taking me out and showing me how to fix a flat tire on my car and change the engine oil and kind of stuff like that, right? So he was physically present, but maybe not fully like intentionally mentally present.
Emotionally there.
Yeah. So, it was just normal for me, and I just continued to go through life. I ended up going to the Naval Academy. My stepdad did kind of support me and push me to help me, go be a pilot in the Navy. He was very supportive in that. He helped me a lot with that, probably because it was a free education, and so he didn't have to pay for college. So he was super supportive of that. But at the same time, he was super helpful with that kind of stuff. I think not until later on in life. Point is, I didn't know. I thought that was normal, right? As a kid with divorced parents, having step parents, and that just kind of became my normal. Later on in life, I think when I actually had some time to reflect on it all, and when I say later on in life, I'm talking like the last couple of years. Looking back on it, I realized that there was a lot of impact there. There was a lot of hurt, a lot of disappointment, a lot of times where I wish there was a father figure in my life, and it really made me think about how I'm showing up now for my kids.
For sure.
And it was really, my own transition out of the military to kind of civilian life. I was so nervous about the transition, and I felt like we were pretty set up. We had started real estate investing a long time ago. We had, property, passive income, fully, financially free, had completely replaced our military income from a financial standpoint. It's pretty set up, but there was a lot of other things, so I was so focused on like building businesses and I got kind of lost, and I wasn't showing up like I should show up as a husband, as a father, for about a 2-year period. For a long time, man, like my kids just saw me like this, right? Like just had the cell phone in front of my face for those that are just listening. And, I was always taking phone calls, raising money for real estate deals or on social media or replying to emails. And I finally kind of woke up one day and, I looked at myself and I looked at what my life would be like in 10 years down the road. I was being coached by an individual and he put me through that exercise of like, hey, if you do what you're doing now, look 10 years down the road and what would that look like for you if you don't change anything with your life? And I did that and it wasn't good, man. Like, we were financially free, we were building wealth. We were good with that, but I didn't have a relationship with my kids. I didn't have a relationship with my wife. I was out of shape. I didn't have a relationship with my God. I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, and I kind of stopped like reading the Bible in the mornings and praying and all this kind of stuff because I was so focused on building wealth and creating income and building our businesses that all the other stuff that I said was important and I said that what I was doing for kind of got away from me. So that's a long answer to your question, but I think coming back to it, I think it's really, really important as a dad to make sure that you don't get so focused on the business side of things that it has an impact
for sure
on your family life.
Yeah. I mean, the separation from your father, when there was a divorce and not really having that, like, was that all part of that thought process? Like, was it like, oh, I see myself becoming that level of a father figure, or was that not really in that calculus? Like looking at your dad in that situation?
Yeah, it's good, man. So, I knew that I never wanted, to leave my family. I never wanted to go through a divorce. I knew that, way ahead of time because I knew like what my experience was, as a child. And I didn't ever want that for my kids. And so I knew from day one of getting married, like through thick or thin, like we're going to make it work. Right.
Yeah.
And so I knew that, but, what I thought, going through this reflection, what I thought I was doing was going to be good for the family. But, considering my own reflections and my own time, not having a father figure, not having a dad, not having time, I knew I wasn't giving that exact same thing that I was wanting in my life. I wanted time with my dad. Like, I could have cared less, like what toys, what vacations, what fancy house, what, materialistic things. Like, I wanted time with my dad, and time equals love. And I didn't have that. And, I was so focused on creating these businesses and wealth and income that I lost focus on just providing time for my kids. So that was kind of all a part of it. I realized that, I wasn't giving any time to my kids because I was waking up at 4 a.m. while I was still active duty Native and going 4 a.m. to, 6:30 a.m. working on real estate, then going to my Navy job from 7, a.m. to 4 p.m., 5 p.m. at night, and then coming home, saying hi, eating some dinner, and then going right back to getting on phone calls, answering emails, doing social media, whatever. So like I was giving them zero time, maybe like an hour at dinner. And it was like, I was physically there, but I wasn't presently there. I wasn't, emotionally there. And that was the same thing, in a different aspect that I received when I was a kid. So I didn't want to do that. And so like I had to make a lot of changes pretty quickly. Once I kind of had that aha moment of like, kind of, look at my life, like ask myself, what am I doing? What's this all for? Right? What's creating business and wealth and income and all this? Like my kids don't care about that. They just want me present, man. So
one of my wives,
we changed a lot of things in our business, and changed a lot of things on my calendar, and so made some big changes.
We have AJ Anderson on the podcast. Looking forward to getting into his story. A fellow business owner, of course, and dad. Hence, he's on the Biz Dad podcast. So, AJ, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us about your family and your business, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, so I'm a 38-year-old young man from northern Wisconsin, currently living in Nashville, Tennessee, with my wife of 7 years, I think, so this September.
Hopefully she's not listening and go,
yeah. Well, I met her 10 years ago. It's our 10-year anniversary of meeting. We have a year-and-a-half-year-old daughter, year and a half old. That's the one. Who we lived in LA for 10 years, and she was born in LA, and then we moved to Nashville, and living happily in Nashville, beautiful area. I worked in the automotive industry pretty much my whole career, starting with an energy drink that Coca-Cola owned, running the marketing in the Midwest, to managing race car drivers, to working for large wheel corporations owned by private equity. And in 2017, I believe it was, I found myself at a PR agency in LA, helping them build out their digital business unit. Basically, how can we, leverage new capabilities to get additional funds out of clients, digital advertising and whatnot. So I built that for a year, and at the end of the year, some other things happened. 2018, I started Wild Lives Media. And we primarily started as a social media agency, and quickly realized that if I could take your $1,000 and give you $4,000 back, from an advertising perspective on a month, it became a lot easier to get clients, as opposed to just saying, your brand's going to look cool on social. You're going to have a lot of impressions. We operate in a world of money. Today, we have, between a team in the US and a team in Canada, we have about 14, 15 employees, 27 clients or so. We'll do about $1.5 million this year in revenue for ourselves, and probably 30 to 40 million for clients, anyways, client revenue. So, it's been a wild ride for sure. Most of the growth came in November, December, January of this last year, 22 to 23. Things just really exploded.
Tell me a little bit about kind of you growing up. Your situation with your dad, and just learn a little bit about some of your background.
Sure. Yeah, my situation was kind of bizarre. It's probably not unlike a lot of people's situations, but I was born out of wedlock. My mother met a man who promised her the world, and turns out he had another family, and he was going to leave them for her. Blah blah blah. Never happened. So I probably remember 5 instances of ever even being around my dad. Probably.
Yeah, he's back.
And then for a few years, he would send, money on birthdays and Christmases, but that's pretty much it, So I wouldn't say I had I didn't have any crazy instances with him, or fallouts or any sort of abuse or anything. Just wasn't there, and that's fine. I had the opportunity to reconnect with him a while ago, and I chose not to. I just thought, the memories that I had were probably, fine enough. And then my mother met my stepfather when I was 9 or so, and he was a Vietnam vet. He had pretty extensive PTSD, and it was some life lessons. And some cool stuff came along with that, but also really, really tough. It was tough. From 9 to when I left at 18 for college, we just did not get along, never any physical abuse or anything, but I just stayed clear of him. If he was upstairs, I would go downstairs, and it was just not a great way to grow up, honestly. But my mom was cool, and then my sister was quite a bit older. So when I was younger, she kind of raised me. And then my grandparents as well. I would spend a lot of time with my grandpa and grandma, who were very salt of the earth, genuine, honest people. My grandpa ran a plumbing business that my grandpa also worked for. So, I just kind of it was just a lot of voids, I guess, that I had to fill. I got really into BMX and snowboarding and, independent sports. I spent a lot of time skipping school to go snowboarding, go on trips with friends, riding BMX. I got to kind of travel the country and the world doing that. And just kind of learned things my own way, honestly. And that's really how I've kind of applied everything to my life is I need to learn it my own way at this point.
Mm-hmm. Man, that's just, excuse me. That's, yeah, as sadly as it is, you said at the beginning, it's not unlike some other people growing up, right? But it still breaks my heart every time to hear stories like that, right? And a kid growing up in a not great environment, and we see it all the time. I was in federal law enforcement for a long time, so I got to see a lot of crazy things. And then, there's literally one case where we took a sleeping child off of a pillow and there was a loaded gun underneath it. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I don't understand how parents do things that they do. But like, what a blessing that it is that I didn't have a dad that did certain things, and like, I look at your situation and go, I don't, as, you said no abuse or things like that, but it's like, man, like just to not have a father around, like, how do you feel that like impacted you not having your actual dad around? And then how did it impact you think, having a stepfather around who was also not what seeming to be a great influence in your life at all? So
not having a dad around at this point in my life, it's weird because like maybe I need more therapy, but I don't think it on the outset affected me as much as it probably could have or should have. I think that I got on just fine. I'm sure there's some deep rooted things. People had a lot of bad dads growing up, who were abusive or played games, psychological games and stuff. And I think I was way better off just not having one around than that, in my opinion. But then, my stepfather, I did learn a lot from him. I think he meant well. He was very nice to my mother. I learned a lot of little things here and there, some of which we'll talk about as we get into the business side of things. But it was just challenging. I think that actually presented a lot of psychological things that I'm still dealing with today, like feeling like I need to tell white lies to just get out of situations, like little things here and there that like I just learned it growing up so I wouldn't have to deal with someone who was ready to explode, like just start screaming at any second. So I would just avoid a lot of things constantly, or I would do whatever I needed to do, right, to survive and get out of that situation. But I would also say though that a lot of how I operate in terms of march to my own drummer come from him as well, though. I think he very much so, he was in trouble with the law over the years, and he very much so believed in like not fully following something blindly just because it's a rule or law, but like what's the reason behind it? Like, do I actually believe in that? So things like we would go. He was a fishing guide in northern Wisconsin, so we would go fishing, and he never listened to the limits, about you can only catch whatever 12 perch and 3 walleye or whatever. He would just do whatever he wanted. And there would be a lot of instances in which I'm getting in the truck and he's arguing with the Department of Natural Resources officer that we're just taking off down the street while the guy's chasing, like little things like that, and I think that's had a positive effect on me because I really try to look at everything and like, is this, like, why does this exist? Why does this rule exist? Is that right or wrong? Should I push back on this? Should I, of course they say no refunds for a flight cancellation, but if I push on them and explain why they're wrong, then they'll refund me, like little things like that are really kind of, I owe to him, I think. So, there's a lot there, both sides.
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing that you said kind of stuck out to me was like you compared yourself to other people's experience as opposed to just looking at your own, which I think a lot of us have a tendency to do anyways, right? Well, I'm better off than that person was. And I love to push back a little bit on things like that because it's like, okay, well, that's great, but where could we still improve if we looked back on it and say, okay, well, because of these situations, I do these things that I don't like which you went into later, right? Like the white lie type of thing. And you actually brought me to, I'm going to forget his name right now. Ed Milet. So Ed Milet talked about how when his dad would come home, he was a drunk, and he would come home and he was like, I had to learn how to read my dad so I knew which dad I was talking to. Am I talking to the drunk dad, or am I talking to the sober dad? Am I talking to the drunk dad to try to keep him away from the alcohol cabinet, or am I talking to the sober? Like, what do I need to do in this situation? What things do I need to say in this situation to redirect what's going on? You know, and it kind of just figuring out how to take the pressure off of you or your siblings or your mom or whoever, you know, for whoever's listening, like whatever situation. And obviously not the most healthy way to work through things. And, you know, it's what you have to do in those situations. But later on in life, I couldn't imagine the weight that kind of has. But, you know, it makes me wonder now, you know, as I'm saying out loud, like, what do I do because of the things that I learned, you know, with my dad? So now I'm going to have to do some self-reflection. Like you said, maybe need some more therapy. We'll see.
Yeah. And then oftentimes this stuff doesn't, you know, become uncovered until you have, you know, additional, you know, issues down the road that cause you to think back or go to therapy, which is obviously a great tool to utilize. But yeah, it's interesting to think about, right?
Yeah, it is. It's, you know, the secret to the, I think it's Secrets to the Millionaire Mind, or was it, no, it was, I'm forgetting the name of the book right now, but I love it. I love the book, can't remember it. So it like talking about how you think about money, and where it comes from and why you think about it the way you do. But like I apply it a lot in other parts of my life. Like usually people use money the same way they saw their parents use money, or the same way other people around them have used money. It's just kind of how, like, if nobody taught you any different, then you just, you know, whatever you caught growing up is how you do it. And I started to apply that a lot to the rest of my life too. Okay, what, like, it was very eye-opening for me on why I did things the way I did with my money, and why my wife did things the way she did. Because she was a saver, and I was a spender. You know, she would just kind of hoard her money because her mom was born and raised in Cuba, you know, so she was just kind of raised like you save your money, you just, because you never know what's going to happen, right? Like, you don't know when the government's going to take over and take control of those bank accounts. And I just saw my parents spend their money paycheck to paycheck. So we could not have been much polar opposites on the financial side, but now thankfully she turned me around. But looking at the same thing growing up and say, okay, well, how did I learn to do this thing as a dad? Or how did I learn to do, why is it that I react this way to my kids? And it goes back usually to how I saw my parents react to certain things, or how I, you know, whatever it is. So as exhausting as those exercises are, I think they're always fun and good and healthy for us to do. Because again, it goes back to what you were saying. Why is that rule in place, or why am I doing what I'm doing? Because now I'm creating rules with my kids. Is that rule because that's just what we did? Like, you know, I said something about my kids, like no singing at the table. And my wife asked me later, she's like, why no singing at the table? I said, well, I don't know. That's just what my parents always said. We're not allowed to sing at the table. I honestly don't know why there's no singing at the table. I really don't understand.
Right.
So I had to reassess that rule and go, you know what? We love singing in this family. Let's sing at the table. I don't care.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting.
Yeah. There's been actually quite a few instances of that for me, where I'm like hard lined about something with my child, and my wife will be like, well, why? And I'm like, I don't actually know why. I'm like, you're right. Like, so yeah, that's been really interesting. And the other thing I wanted to mention too was in terms of like uncovering learned traits from family is like, it's a lot of work to dive into that, but it certainly is better to do that work and figure it out
for sure.
before it has to come up from an issue, right, with a spouse or with a business partner or something, you know?
Yeah, for sure.